On the fourth Thursday in November, millions of Americans rejoice. Turkey on the table, family toasts, football blaring, gratitude everywhere. But on the fourth Thursday in November, in Plymouth, Massachusetts, hundreds of Indigenous people gathered to mourn. Fasting, praying, marching. Speaking truth about stolen lands and ancestors'
and land.
We will never forget the atrocities that fell upon our people as a result of their violent trespass.
Over land.
Here
Still
we are
today,
about to celebrate Thanksgiving, and the fact that our tribe is still fighting for a little bit of land that we have. We own half of 1% of our ancestral territory, and 400 years later, we don't have much to be thankful for.
Well, we can't change the past, but what we can do is change the future. And the way that we change the future is to educate people and start understanding that this is not a day of celebration. This is a day of mourning.
The same day, two realities. This is the bizarre contradiction of Thanksgiving. And now we're telling the full story. Before we get into the full story, if you enjoy diving into the hidden, mind-blowing side of history, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow and keeps you in the loop for more untold truths like this one. Let's go back to 1621. The Wampanoag people weren't just background characters in someone else's story. They were the stewards of a vibrant, ancient world. For thousands of years, some estimates say over 12,000, they'd thrived along the coasts of what we now call Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Think about that. Generations upon generations building communities, trading with neighbors, fishing in bountiful waters, and cultivating the land with sophisticated techniques. They grew the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, in a symbiotic way that nourished the soil and fed their people. Their society was structured, with sachems like Massasoit leading through wisdom and alliances, not brute force. Spirituality was woven into everything, from the cycles of the seasons to the stories passed down around fires. But by 1620, when the Mayflower dropped anchor, the Wampanoag were already reeling from catastrophe. A mysterious epidemic, likely brought by earlier European traders, had swept through their villages just a few years prior. Historians debate the exact disease, but it could have been smallpox or leptospirosis. Whatever it was devastating. Up to 90% of the population in some areas perished. Villages that once buzzed with life stood empty, fields overgrown. Massasoit, the great sachem, had lost so many of his people that his once powerful confederacy was vulnerable to rivals like the Narragansett. Into this fragile world stumbled the Pilgrims, about 100 English separatists fleeing religious persecution, half of them dying that first brutal winter from starvation and sickness. They were unprepared, clueless about the land. Without help, they wouldn't have lasted. And that's where the Wampanoag stepped in, not out of some fairy tale kindness, but strategic necessity. Massasoit saw an opportunity, ally with these newcomers against common enemies. Enter Squantum, better known as Squanto, a Patuxet man who'd been kidnapped years earlier by English explorers, sold into slavery in Spain, escaped to England, and miraculously made his way back home, only to find his entire village wiped out by the plague. Squanto became the bridge, teaching the settlers survival skills, how to fertilize soil with fish, which berries were safe, how to trap game. It's mind-blowing when you think about it. A man who'd endured so much trauma, turning around to help the very people whose kin had upended his world. And then, in the fall of 1621, came that famous gathering. It wasn't the sit-down dinner of our school plays. No invitations sent out on parchment. The Pilgrims were celebrating their first harvest with gunfire volleys, a common English custom. The Wampanoag, hearing the shots from afar, assumed trouble and sent 90 warriors to investigate. What they found was a feast in progress. Venison from deer they'd hunted, seafood, wildfowl, maybe even turkey, corn, squash, berries. It lasted 3 days, a mix of diplomacy, games, and shared meals. But here's the kicker. It wasn't called Thanksgiving. That term came later. For the Wampanoag, gatherings like this were routine, expressions of reciprocity and alliance, nothing extraordinary. It could have been the start of something different, a real partnership. But history, as we know, took a tragic turn. Fast forward just 16 years to 1637. The same Plymouth colony, now stronger and hungrier for land, clashed with the Pequot people over trade routes and territory. Tensions boiled over into the Pequot War. In May, English forces, led by Captain John Mason and allied with some Mohegan and Narragansett warriors, attacked a Pequot fort near the Mystic River at dawn. They surrounded the village, set fires to trap those inside, and in the chaos, hundreds of Pequot men, women, and children lost their lives. It was a calculated strike, one that shattered the Pequot Nation. Afterward, the colonial leaders didn't mourn, they celebrated. Connecticut's governor proclaimed a day of thanksgiving, praising divine favor for the victory. Similar proclamations followed in Massachusetts. This wasn't about harvest anymore, it was about conquest, about claiming the land as their own. What gets me every time is the speed of that shift. One generation sharing food, the next declaring holy days over the ruins of villages. It's like watching a friendship sour into something unrecognizable. And this pattern? It didn't stop there. Over the decades, as more settlers poured in, Thanksgivings became tools of empire. After King Philip's War in 1675 to 1676, named for Metacom, Massasoit's son, who led a desperate resistance, more proclamations hailed the defeat of native forces. Thousands died on both sides, but the Wampanoag and their allies were decimated, their land seized. Zoom out further and you see the bigger picture unfolding across the continent. Diseases like smallpox, introduced unwittingly or sometimes deliberately, ravaged populations without immunity. Estimates vary, but pre-Columbian native numbers in North America might have been 5 to 18 million. By the late 1800s, they'd plummeted to around 250,000. Broken treaties piled up, over 500 signed, most violated. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 under President Jackson forced tribes like the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears, a grueling march where thousands perished from exposure and disease. Then came the boarding schools, starting in the late 1800s. Places like Carlisle Indian Industrial School with the motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man." Children were taken from families, their hair cut, languages forbidden, cultures stripped away. It's heartbreaking to imagine kids punished for speaking their mother tongue, all in the name of civilization. These weren't isolated incidents, they were policies designed to erase entire ways of life. This part still blows my mind because it's not ancient history. The last federally run boarding schools closed in the 1970s, and the trauma echoes today in higher rates of poverty, health issues, and cultural disconnection. Yet, amid all this, there's that bizarre irony. The national Thanksgiving holiday, formalized by Lincoln in 1863 during the Civil War, draws from those early colonial victories. We stuff ourselves with foods native peoples domesticated, turkey, potatoes, corn, while glossing over the cost. But here's where the story pivots from despair to defiance. Jump to 1970, Plymouth, Massachusetts. The town was gearing up for a big 350th anniversary bash of the Pilgrims' arrival. They invited Frank Wamsutta James, president of the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead, to speak. Wamsutta drafted a powerful address, pulling no punches about colonization's toll. But when organizers previewed it, they balked. Too controversial, they said. They wanted happy vibes only. Wamsutta refused to be silenced. Instead, on Thanksgiving Day, he and about 500 native people from across the country gathered at Coles Hill overlooking Plymouth Rock. They declared it the first National Day of Mourning. No feasts, no parades, just raw truth-telling. They buried Plymouth Rock in sand as a symbol, spoke of stolen lands and broken promises, and vowed to remember. One quote from that day sticks with me. The Pilgrims had hardly explored the shores of Cape Cod for 4 days before they had robbed the graves of my ancestors and stolen their corn and beans. It was a call to acknowledge the pain without sugarcoating. Since then, every year, the United American Indians of New England organize the event. Participants fast in solidarity, share stories, and highlight ongoing struggles, like environmental threats to sacred sites or fights for federal recognition. I've read accounts from attendees over the years, and they're inspiring. Munanam James, Wamsutta's son, has carried the torch, emphasizing that it's not about hate, but healing through honesty. They invite allies too, building bridges where once there were walls. In a world quick to forget, this gathering stands as a beacon of remembrance. And speaking of resilience, oh man, this is where the story really shines. Native peoples didn't vanish, as some old narratives claimed. They're thriving in ways that honor the past while shaping the future. Take the Wampanoag themselves. After centuries of marginalization, they regained federal recognition in the 1980s and 2000s. Now they're revitalizing their language, once nearly lost, through immersion programs. Kids are learning words their ancestors spoke, keeping the spirit alive. Look at the Navajo Nation, the largest reservation in the U.S. Their code talkers in World War II used their language to baffle enemies, saving countless lives. Today, descendants teach that history in schools, blending pride with education. Or the Lakota at Standing Rock in 2016, where water protectors from hundreds of tribes stood against the Dakota Access Pipeline. It wasn't just a protest. It was a global movement highlighting Indigenous sovereignty and environmental justice. Powwows coast to coast draw crowds, celebrating dance, music, and art. Tribes like the Mashantucket Pequot run museums that tell their own stories, not filtered through outsiders. Economic ventures, casinos funding scholarships, health clinics, and cultural centers turn survival into strength. Legal wins like the 2020 Supreme Court ruling affirming half of Oklahoma as native land show the fight continues and wins. What gets me is how this connects to today. In 2026, with truth and reconciliation efforts gaining traction, think Canada's commissions or growing U.S. calls for similar, we're at a crossroads. Holidays like Thanksgiving could evolve into days of real reflection, acknowledging both the good and the grim. So, what do we do with all this? I'm not saying ditch the turkey or cancel family dinners. Heck, many Native families celebrate too, focusing on gratitude in their own ways, maybe with traditional foods like fry bread or wild rice. The point isn't guilt-tripping, it's about expanding our understanding. Imagine if schools taught the full arc, the 1621 alliance, the 1637 tragedy, the ongoing resilience. Kids would grow up seeing history as layered, not linear. True Thanksgiving? It's remembering the pain and still choosing hope for survival, culture, the future. That's the bizarre, tangled truth of America's favorite holiday. A tale of fleeting peace, profound loss, and unbreakable spirit. A people meant to fade, who refused. If this opened your eyes, drop a comment below. Did school skip this for you too? What hit hardest? Native viewers, share your thoughts. We value them deeply. We read every comment. Smash that subscribe and bell for more dives into history's hidden edges. Next up, the forgotten horrors of the Pequot War up close. Stay curious, stay respectful. The wildest stories, they're the ones buried deepest. Thanks for joining. Catch you next time.